Okay, all right. So my name is Sally Ann Spence, and I've worked with dung beetles for nearly 3 decades now. I'm also a livestock farmer and an ecologist, and I specialise in pastoral land biodiversity, ecology and management, etc. And dung beetles a lot, very much. In fact, right now I'm going to take you on a bit of a whiz tour. Has to be whizzy because I've got 20 minutes. All right, and then I'm passing over to this gentleman here, Eurion, who's going to talk you a lot more about parasites and things because he's very good at that. Right, okay, I've got to do my own clicker, haven't I? Okay, let's start with recognising our dung beetle species. We have dung beetles in the UK. All right, we split them into 2 groups. We call them the tunnelers and the dwellers, those that live in it and those that live under it. That's a bit of a simplification, but it's going to work for now. The Onthophagus are gorgeous. They're little round beetles, true scarabs, and we have 6 species in that group. They're about the size of my little fingernails, but the biggest ones, really. And then we have the geotrupids. They're the big chunky ones. You tend to see them. They tend to be night active on the whole. And although you can see some of them, Typhaeus will be around sometimes in the daytime. I ramble. 8 species of those in the UK. Lovely, lovely beetles. Turn them over. They're iridescent. And they squeak. And they're just gorgeous. Then you've got the Aphodiines. Okay, big group now. They're sort of pill-shaped. And they range from a couple of millimeters to just under a couple of centimeters. And you have 43 species in the UK. So we actually have quite a lot of dung beetles when you think about it. Did you know that? Did you know we had that many dung beetles? I see. We start with discovery. Okay, so where do they live? They live in the dung pats. Okay, these beetles are doing ecosystem functions that are really important to you and the wider landscape and your environment on your farm, your wildlife, and also for your livestock. But they're doing it inside the dung pats, not in your muck heaps. Okay, so if you spread out your farmyard manure, they're not going to be going into that. All right, it's a totally different substrate by then. It's got lots of fungus and things in it, and it's just changed. They're going in where the pat comes from the animal. They're a very ancient group, and that's what they're doing. All the adults fly. The adult stage flies. It moves around. Their habitat is disappearing, so they're moving around by flight. So your Aphodiines are the ones who are living in it, okay? And if you open up the dung pat and you find a C-shaped larvae, it's the Aphodiine larvae. If you have tunnels, you've got the geotrupids and the Onthophagus. Geotrupids going down quite some depth. If you have a look at there, it says 1 meter. I've chased one down to 1.5 meters. Okay, that was after I'd done a workshop with a cluster group, and we'd gone out, and the farmer I've run a cluster group with, the host farmer's now panicking. He's got a bit of a sweat on. She's banged on about dung beetles, and we better find one, because if we don't, all the other farmers are going to take the mickey out of me for years. So we went out, and there's a very, very light sandy soils on that farm. We dug a massive hole, because it was light sandy soils, and it kept collapsing in, and it went down to about 1.5 meters, that particular beetle. So, that's going down some. So they're making a brood ball underground, in that case, in the little chambers, and they're laying 1 egg on each brood ball. If they don't get a lot of dung, you're not going to get a lot of brood balls. You're not going to get a lot of beetles. If you have dung that the female beetle only makes a small brood ball, you also get different shades different sizes of beetles as well. No rollers, okay? But we do have a beetle, Typhaeus, is a minotaur beetle, it's a dung beetle that likes light sandy soils and things like that, and it specializes in dung in a pellet form. So sheep or rabbit or deer or something like that, and it rolls it into its hole. So it's just moving something that's already in a pelleted form. With these dung beetles, you get specialists and generalists. And they're coming in to the dung at different stages, and they're also active all year round, different species all the time. So this is what you're interested in. What do they do for us? Why are they so important? Why is that idiot on the stage getting very excited about them? Okay? This is what they do. You're going to have to read some of the list because I haven't got long to go through everything. But there's a lot there because they do a lot. Think of those tunnels. That's aeration. It's preventing compaction. It's letting water through the soil. It's mixing up your subsoil and your topsoil. It's burying your pathogens, harmful pathogens, E. coli, things like that. It's just mixing up your fungus and bacteria as well. Parasites. We all talk about dung beetles and parasites. Why are they helping our parasite burden? They're doing incredible things. The parasites that pass through your animal's gut will go into the dung, and they sort of actually live in the wet film around the top of the dung pat. And then the dung beetles are drying that out. The adults have mouth parts where they macerate the dung and suck it dry. The larvae actually eat the dry matter. So when you suck it dry, you stop that habitat for that larva to continue its life cycle and migrate out into the grass. That's really, really important, so the animal can't digest it. They also carry phoretic mites. You can see a little phoretic mite there, and they're clustered around the beetle. That's a symbiotic relationship. It means it's a good relationship. They're in a happy relationship together. The dung beetle is carrying those mites around the pasture. They drop off into the dung, and therefore they will consume fly eggs and fly maggots, and probably nematodes. We're working on that as well. Not all nematodes are bad. That is also very important for the dung beetle, because if that doesn't happen, what you get is a lot of fly maggots in the dung pat, and it's their dung that the dung beetle won't want to eat. So it's no longer the cattle dung or something like that. Right, let's have another quick look here. I hope you're reading the list, because I can't go over it all. If you have a look on that bottom slide with all those yellow dots there, that I have a research area on my own farm at home, and this is on my optimum site, and that is a geotrupid, about the size of my thumb is the hole, and every single one of those yellow dots is a hole that's going down about a foot in old money. I'm imperial, so it's gone down about a foot there, and that is happening all over my field. My livestock is out 24/7, 365 days a year. 9 tons of dung a cow is producing on average per year, and that is happening all over my field. There is nothing in the agricultural machinery area that will do that sort of thing for compaction, water, aeration, etc., etc. So really, really important. And then you've got that thing flying, okay? That thing flying on the black slide, that's a bat, and they eat dung beetles. Okay, this is a big problem for me, because everything eats dung beetles. They're hugely important to the wider biodiversity. And you have dung beetles that fly at night. Excellent. Those things eat them. And then you've got things that fly in the day, dung beetles that fly in the day, and things like that thing with a yellow beak there, orange beak there, they eat them as well. And that's a chuff. So there's millions of different things that actually are dung beetles right across the board, just about everything, even owls and everything. So you've got this wonderful interaction where you've got day flying, night flying, all year round, etc., etc. Pasture fouling, you all know what happens there. If the dung stays on the surface, you haven't got that grazing ability. You want that dung in the ground. You want that carbon locked up. You want that methane production stopped. And you want to make sure that your fertility continues and that there's organic matter for plant root uptake. All those wonderful things. So there's actually quite a lot on that list. There's an awful lot going on there, thanks to that dung beetle. Right. So soil health, dung beetles and soil health. I've been asked today already, are they important for soil health? Yes, they're hugely important for soil health. They've got this incredible interaction with the soil. So let's have a look at healthy soil. You have soil biology, very important. Soil structure, very important. Soil chemistry, very important. Organic matter, I'm reading it off. I shouldn't be reading this off, actually. I've done it enough times. Plenty of air to maintain. So soil is full of air. It's a living thing. I don't need to tell you this. You're at a regenerative farming conference. You should know about soil. It's a living thing, and it needs lots of air, and you need water moving through it. You need all these things going on. There is ticks beside each and every one of those. Think of what those ecosystem services were a minute ago. Dung beetles are ticking every single one. So they have this incredible interaction with the soil. So why am I so passionate about dung beetles? I spent 6 years, and slightly more actually, collecting data for the IUCN report. It went into a report that was dubbed by the press as a State of Nature report. And this was the findings. And it's a little shocking, to be honest with you. Our dung beetles are in trouble. And that's very, very worrying. Less than 48% there of least concern. Let's have a look at this. Regionally extinct, okay? That means extinct, gone. Critically endangered, possibly extinct, okay? Critically endangered, vulnerable, well, you're getting into trouble there. You really are, from genetic points of view and various other things, isolated populations, all sorts of different things, so they're on their way out too. It's not looking too good, is it? And that's a big worry. Think about Australia. Anyone from Australia and New Zealand, Tasmania, and places like that, they'll tell you you are so lucky to have a dung beetle assemblage that are actually eating your dung pats. And you really ought to be looking after them, because you have them. You need to increase them. It's really, really important, because they had an industry that didn't have dung beetles. They do have dung beetles in Australia, New Zealand, Tasmania, but they eat marsupial dung, which is a totally different dung to cattle and sheep. So they had a massive increase in hide flies and buffalo flies and various other zoonotic problems as well. Huge problem with pollution, all that organic matter sitting on the surface. A huge increase of pasture that they needed and various other things as well, crippling the industry, and they had to start bringing in dung beetles. It's not very easy to do that, guys. We have the assemblage. We have the 365-day-a-year group here. So we need to be doing something about it. These are really important for our ecosystem functions. What's going on? All of you right now will be thinking ivermectins. She's going to say ivermectins. That's the biggie. All right? because it's the one thing we all concentrate on. Why do we concentrate on it? We have a lot of funding to do research into that. And it is very true. Ivermectins are having a massive effect. And it's not just ivermectins. There's other things. I'm not going to put that at the top of my list, because often when you put things in a list form, everyone goes to the top of the list and thinks that's the worst thing. Well, I think you'll find that this is the worst thing. Removing livestock. Right? The clue's in the name, dung beetles. If you don't have dung, you don't have dung beetles. And what's really worrying is if you start moving livestock, then you're also fragmenting their habitat too and making it harder for them to move around. And they need a mixture of different livestock as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. So you've got the change of management. When you're putting livestock indoors, and this is very difficult because a lot of our schemes and things tell us to keep our animals indoors over winter. And you can't always have your animals out in the winter anyway, because you've got other things going on with your landscape. So, but if you put those animals indoors, do you remember I said there was winter active species, and we've got early spring species and things like that. So again, you're fragmenting their landscape for them. Roads and infrastructure I haven't put on this list. It's quite hard to fly across the M25 when you're only flying at 2 meters high. You're not going to go very well. It's going to be a bit unsuccessful. Climate change is having a big effect on them as well. And golf, any golf players here? Oh, you're lucky. You're lucky. Stop playing things and doing things with sandy light soils. All my sandy light soils are being turned into everything but grassland. And there's a whole load of species we're losing on sandy soils in particular. And then, of course, the chemical treatments. I'm not playing it down. It has massive effects on the whole system. Conservation. Some of the ideas that we've got here. Alternative parasite control. That'd be easy if I could say, right, don't use Krovec anymore. I've got something that works just as well for just as long. It's not quite as simple as that. But there's other things you can do and bring on board as well. So lots of different examples on that too. Reduce your treatments. That's a huge one. That's a massive one. I'm not asking you, and it'd be totally unreasonable of me and really bad for animal welfare, to stand here and say, right, all of you, stop treating your livestock. That is utterly ridiculous. You won't have a puppy. If you've had a puppy, you've treated it. If you had a kitten, you've treated it. If you've had kids, you've probably had to treat them too for lice and God knows what. You know, the young animals, they're a very hard group not to treat, and there's various other things going on as well. And don't think that there is such a thing as no parasite. All right, there's no holy grail as no parasites. Parasites are part of a healthy system. Everything has parasites. It's when those parasite burden becomes a bit of a problem. Right, winter grazing. Yeah, I'd love to see animals out all year round, please. If you're treating, quarantine pasture. We talk about native breeds. I spoke about this in my safari earlier on. If you've got animals out all year round, grazing on a mixture of things and ground that's not disturbed, because dung beetles don't like disturbed ground because their life cycle's partly in the ground as well. Very often it's native breeds. It's not because they are able to overwinter and they're doing a lot of conservation grazing and that type of thing. So they tend to be that sort of group. Unimproved pasture, they don't like artificial fertilizers, don't like slurry being injected and things like that. Horses, I'm not even going to go, that's a whole different talk. Right. Okay. Making a chemical choice for your dung beetles. Here's a few ideas here, but I also want you to look at, and I hate to say it, right down the end there, most toxic to less toxic. I hate the word toxic, but these are insecticides. You're using insecticides, and guess what? Dung beetles are insects. So if they're going to continue as an active ingredient throughout the animal into the dung, it's going to have an adverse effect. We do have dung beetles that are showing a little bit of resistance. We do have dung beetles that try and actively avoid dung with ivermectins in it and other chemicals as well. But you have a bit of a problem. If they eat the dung straight away, then they're going to have what we call lethal effects. That means they die, basically. And then they have something called sublethal effects. And this is what affects their navigation, their fertility, their pupal development, and things like that. And it's a death by 1,000 cuts, basically. Right. There's a couple of things on there for you to have a look at. This is a really quick, I've got to be quick now. This is a really, really important piece of research. This is a tiny bit out of an important piece of research that's recently been done by Clive Turner and Dave Atwell, and I was given a bit of a hand as well, but not much of a hand, I must admit. But what we were looking here as was at dung beetle communities on Dartmoor. And I want you to look at this slide. This slide shows the diversity of species over a massive area. Okay, we did lots of sampling on lots of different farms and sites. And right here, it shows you have it shows you the species groups in each of these. And look what's going to the top of the list. It's sheep. Sheep are definitely coming out universally, and this is happening right across we're supporting more dung beetle species than any other types of livestock. We've got a slight problem there because sheep also tend to be the ones we treat more than any other livestock. But that's really interesting. So yeah, it's a bit of information for you on that. I've got a whiz. Whiz. Right. Oh my goodness, this is a meaty slide for you. How am I going to do this in 1 minute? Right. You've got to review your management regime, basically. There's a whole load of things you can do here. You can mix your species. That's quite important. You're not going to get the perfect thing. It's a mixture of things that you can do that work for you. That's what I'm after. If you're treating your young stock and you're not treating your adult stock, brilliant. If you're having to treat your sheep, but you've also got cattle, you're not treating them, then, that's reasonable. We've got some dung on the floor that's not treated. So, that's quite important. Right. What do dung beetles really want you to do? Let's go and have a look at the bottom list. They want you to reduce your artificial fertilizers. I'm not going to say no, because there might be a situation where you just can't, but if you can, awesome. Reduce soil disturbance. Basically, they don't want any soil disturbance. They want their animals out all year, please. Reduce, or no insecticides, we'll go for reduce. They want you to reduce your compaction. We don't treat our grasslands terribly well. You wouldn't drive all over your arable fields all the time, but permanent pasture, we roar all over it. And that's not good for a whole load of other reasons. Please stop doing that. If you can, use a drone. Drones are awesome. You can check your animals really quickly on drones. It takes me 2 minutes to check 200 acres. It's brilliant. And then I can go straight to the animal I've got a problem with. So that's one thing you can do. And then you've got to get a survey, species survey done, professionally done, so you understand where your dung beetles are and where you're going. That's quite important too. Right. Let's have a quick look here. So Clive and I brought out an assessment that you can download off the Dung Beetles for Farmers website. And this is a baseline assessment, and it's enabling you to have a look at the quality of your habitat. Because if you haven't got good habitat, you haven't got a large amount of dung beetles by any means. So, and this has got self-explanatory instructions on it as well. Come and have a chat to me if you want to know more about that. And then professional surveys. So I do professional surveys as well, which is slightly different from the assessment, and that gives you a baseline data, and you go from there. This is quite a difficult group, so you tend to have to get all the specimens verified as well, and get it done a couple of times a year. So that's something else that we offer. Right. Okay. Now I've whizzed, and there's so much information I haven't given you. I'm so sorry, but time. But I do want you to have a look at this. This is a sheep dung on my field at home. Okay, and this is after 5 years. I am making a farming business on that ground as well. That's quite important, because I tell people I can't tell you to farm for dung beetles. And one of you stands up and says, "Oh, okay, fine. Did you make any money last year doing that?" And I turn around and say, "Well, no, but aren't they gorgeous?" You're actually going to walk out here and say, "Well, she was nice, bit of a tree hugger, bit of a nutter, and we'll just carry on as we were." All right, so it's quite important that I actually make a business out of this as well. Right, so here is a sheep dung, and this is what should be happening. Can I get sound? Yeah, wow. Who said the wow? These wow. Is the power of dung beetles. This dung will be broken down by the morning. Just going to put my hand through there again. You can just see if I can just... Or a load up on my hands. It's just alive. So when you look at dung beetles, you think, well, they're very, very small little things. She's very excited about them, but really a little tiny thing like that's not going to move my entire cow pat. They do when they're like that. There's 3 species in that one. Yeah. Right. I'm out of time, aren't I? Oh, 2 minutes. Oh, even better. Right. Okay. So, with your, let's go whiz back. Can I whiz back? Does it go back? Oh, look at that. Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's go back a bit more, because that slide, that was the one you all wanted to be interested in. You're going to be talking about weight trait and all. I can't take too much away from you then. Let's have a quick look. You're going to be talking about that, and you're going to be talking about that. Okay, let's go to that one. Right. Anti-parasitic lays. Awesome. They do work. They're very good, and they're part of your toolkit. Okay? Samfoin and things like that are brilliant for your soil health too. Plantain is great for grazing if you've had a very dry summer and all your grasses are gone and all the rest of it. But if you've got a half-dead animal, honestly, it's not going to come back. Okay? It's about keeping healthy animals healthy. And that's the important thing. And I think at that point, talking about healthy animals is a good lead into you. Brilliant. Right. No, you can't find your...
Brilliant. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Sally Ann. I'm going to sit down, actually, because it's day 2. I'm tired, and I can see my slides better. Yeah. So you're on to the second dung geek of the afternoon, actually. Sort of we like to geek out on all things dung, get our hands mixed in it, like Sally Ann was doing there. I suppose I do it from a slightly different perspective. I'm more from the parasite side, whereas obviously Sally Ann's on the dung beetle and other insects. But the interaction between these is quite important. So I'm going to talk more about the role of how we control parasites and fecal egg counting, which is what we do. So as just a quick intro to us, we're kind of Texans, the company. We're better known for our FECPAC. We've been doing this for a number of years. The original FECPAC with a microscope. We've now got our cloud-based image kind of method of doing it. We've also got a lab. But today's not about the tech and us, but we've been doing this for a long time, kind of educating farmers, vets, etc., about how to do this properly. This is about how do we use tools like fecal egg counting. Doesn't matter what method you use, send to a vet, microscopes or whatever. It's how we use that properly when we test, etc. I've been doing this for 21 years, myself, involved in that. And over that kind of period, we've collaborated with a lot of people around the world on this. You'll see kind of food processors, retailers there, etc., talking to supply chain, to producers. And obviously the middle ones, you've got SCOPs and COWS, which are 2 industry bodies all set up about the sustainable control of parasites. And in the past, for me, when I started off 21 years ago, it was all about performance of lambs, calves. It was all about wormer resistance, which I'm going to touch on. And it's in the last kind of 10, 12 years, especially in the last 5 years, the dung beetle, and you can see the Dung Beetle Trust there. I haven't got the Dung Beetle for Farmers kind of logo, but it's become a much bigger motivator, actually, alongside performance and resistance. So yeah, it has become a real motivator for people to speak to us. What have we learned? So what I want to cover in the next kind of 15 minutes or so is about, how do we use regular parasite monitoring and avoid the common pitfalls, trying to get our worming correctly, that we're not having too much of a detrimental effect on those dung beetles. And you'll see that little symbol there signposting some pitfalls. And for me, it's probably been discussed a lot in the last 2 days, the regenerative farming is a balancing act between looking after our ecology, looking after the planet, looking after these important insects on our farm, reducing emissions. But Sally Ann's alluded to this, we are food producers. That's our kind of, we do produce food. That's where the profitability comes from. So performance of animals and livestock is massively important to us. And welfare is a big issue as well, okay? And the Regen Balancing Act, we can get, it's a balancing act when it comes to parasite control as well. As Sally Ann said, it's refreshing. I met Sally Ann earlier this year, actually. Having somebody on the ecology side who understands the balancing we got to do. We're not anti-worming. We're about worming correctly. We're about using it at appropriate times. We get this wrong, we can accept, we can disturb either side. As Sally Ann said, the easiest thing we can do to protect dung beetles, they'll tell you all to stop worming tomorrow. It'll be rare that any farmer can not worm at all. We might have some. But that'll have welfare issues, performance, obviously, issues, but also the carbon dioxide side. Parasites have a big influence on emissions, on efficiencies of systems as well. So that's another driver for us. So the Morden have identified parasites, internal parasites, as one of the top 3 animal health issues affecting the emissions kind of cycle. So we get it wrong and we have a parasite kind of load which kind of affects us, we're going to not help the emissions, okay? And things can catch us out really quickly. So been speaking a lot over the last few days about homuncus, for example, in this part of the world, and how quickly that can occur, even on fairly clean systems with arable rotations, grassland rotations and arable, it can be. So how do we maintain a bit of a balance when it comes to parasites? There's a lot of things, but monitoring is a key to maintain that balance for me. So, fecal egg count. Back to the basics. What fecal egg counts is, and I think it's important to remember, we're somebody here who sells fecal egg counting technology. We have to remember what it is. It's a guide to the level of parasites there. It's an indicator test. That's all fecal egg count does. It provides more data and more information for us to help us make a decision on whether we treat or not, okay? It just provides more data. We have to remember that. It also tells us if that treatment's worked. And it has its limitations, okay? We only detect adults, okay? They have to be in adult stages by the time we detect them. There is natural variation. It doesn't mean it's useless. It means we have to understand those limitations to, we can understand them properly. It'll be a very useful test. So monitoring parasites and using fecal egg counting, because of those limitations, the concern I have when I speak to people, on the stand with the Pasture for Life stand there and some of the members there, for me, 2 or 3 tests a year is not monitoring, okay? And for me, half the tests we do, the results probably won't change the outcome that much. It might be a test that was high. Well, I thought they looked a bit wormy. I was going to worm them anyway. So that was a waste of £20 or £16, whatever I paid. All the alternatives, but half it. But a lot of them will be enlightening and a lot of them will change kind of course. Trouble is, I can't tell you, I've done this for 20 years, I can't tell you which ones will be the enlightening ones and the ones that changes something. And sometimes it's about giving peace of mind. Well, I'm going to worm them. They look a bit wormy. Sometimes it's about giving peace of mind over our actions as well, okay? But if half of them, don't change much and half of them are enlightening and etc., if you're only doing 2 or 3 tests a year, you might not, maybe I didn't change much. I've invested in that. And what was the point of that investment? But we do regular testing. And this is a word we bring. Regular is a key word for me, and that's going to feature during the next 10 minutes. For me, that's the kind of key word here. Because of the limitations, etc., if things have got limitations, the more regular we monitor, the better it is, tracking trends, etc. What do we mean by regular monitoring? We got kits that we can use on farm, etc. These are our top 10 farm users. This is how many tests a year our top 10 farm users were doing. And a lot of them will do over 5 samples a month in the peak grazing seasons. And, the majority do between 20 and 50 tests. You've got the fanatics there on the table. But, that's what so why so regular, and for me, the reason why we need to do that regular, one of the pitfalls I see, and I've been speaking to somebody this morning actually, the interval between testing is often too long. We might have a result back, and this is an example from cattle, we might have a result back which is fairly low. We decide on that result and maybe have they looking okay, we might not treat. The common thing is that we often don't retest for another 4 to 6 weeks after that. The issue is with the life cycle, okay, we only pick up adults, okay? It takes 3 weeks from when those livestock are out there grazing the pastures, any worms they're picking up, takes 3 weeks to develop inside the stomach of the animals, to develop into egg-laying adults, and that's when we detect them, okay? So let's give you a scenario where you might have turned a bunch of young calves, kind of 4 or 5 months old calves or whatever, into a paddock which is fairly heavily infested with worms maybe. It's had a big hatch, the conditions have been right. You turned them into that paddock 2 weeks ago, we do a test today, we might have a very low or even a 0 count, okay? But there might be a lot of larvae in there developing into adults. And they'll start doing damage then actually as well. We've got to be careful of that. But, you leave it for 4 to 6 weeks. By the time we go back and check that, if you're not keeping an eye on growth rates and things, they kind of had a lot of detriment on that performance, etc. And you could test them 10 days, 2 weeks' time and have a very different result. So that limitation of only detecting adults, for me, for young stock, lambs, etc., we should be testing again 2 to 3 weeks. If the weather's going to continue like this, nice, dry, hot period, we can maybe extend that and the stock are looking good. But if it gets wet like last year was, the end of last summer, we need to be back there 10 days, 2 weeks ideally. So we're going to test often, especially, this is for lambs and your first season grazers especially. We need to be regularly testing those vulnerable kind of animals especially. And there are occasions where we may not wait for facts to rise. We have to be careful of this. So nematodirus in lambs is a good example. We might not, I think it's still a useful indicator of what's happening because we might have other worms, but we're going to be really careful of nematodirus. And sometimes the issues can happen in terms of performance at a stage before the eggs are laid. A typical example of that is after a drought breaks. During a long, dry, hot period, we get a buildup of eggs in the pasture. There's not much eggs hatching, so so the eggs are staying there in clumps of dry poo in the pasture there, and basically there's a build-up. There's not much hatching, so the pasture's fairly clean of larvae or any larvae that they're shading inside in the top couple of centimeters of the soil. They're not getting exposed. They're probably performing really well. But what tends to happen when that breaks? The moisture comes, softens those fecal pats. We get a big explosion of parasites all at the same time. That couples with the same time when those young animals haven't been exposed during that drought period, so they haven't built up an immunity. So it can be a bit of a... So we've got to be careful then, and sometimes we'd advocate going in with a treatment, potentially, if we see the signs are there in terms of performance, weight loss or whatever, maybe before eggs come out as well. So just understanding some of the limitations. The other bit we see is not sampling different groups. This is a common one. So this will be a typical farm in West Wales, where I'm from. And this is an example from project farms we used. What quite often, we might have 4 different groups of lambs grazing in different parts of the farm, different paddocks. What tends to happen, we'll do fecal egg counting. We'll only get a sample from one group and send it to the vet or send it to the lab or use our kit or whatever. That quite often happens. We might have a result of 280 eggs per gram in this one. I'm not going into interpretation, but that's a fairly medium-low result, okay? We might decide, based on that, we're not going to worm. But we don't decide for that. Often the decision's made for all of the lambs on the farm. We base that decision on one group of lambs. Time and time again, when we do this, the variation between groups of lambs on the farm is actually quite stark. And you can see there's 2 groups there, quite a lot higher. They are in the kind of region where we'd think about treating, etc. So where we advocate is, where we can, different management groups, where it's feasible, test separately, okay? This often happens. So we get scenarios, the full picture is a very different story. We miss treatments for 2 groups that might have needed it, and we might be compromising growth rates and performance. They might not look that bad. Here's a stat for you. Worms can affect growth rates by 50% without showing any clinical signs. They're not daggy, they're not scouring, they don't look too bad, but they're 50% reduction in growth rates, okay? So, lambs poorly perform, and then farmers, we don't believe in testing, okay? So we see that very often. FEC is only useful in lambs as well. We also see this on the sheep side. We actually advocate a lot of testing in ewes, especially, pre-tupping. We are in homunculus kind of territory here, although homunculus is on the spread across the country. But yeah, we've got to be careful of homunculus. And again, we can use kind of fecal egg counts as part of those tools. So pre-tupping is rarely, but we should be using it around that lambing period. So it's quite often the time we treat. But this is really, I'm not going to go into detail on this slide, but fecal egg count is a useful guide to when contamination is happening in those adult ewes and when we need to treat to stop contamination, if we need to. And we did a project with Farming Connect on this in Wales. You can see Leslie Stubbing, somebody you might know from Scops there. We joined with Zoetis as well, as well as 6 farmers in Wales. And we've moved a lot of folks away from blanket treating all our ewes at lambing time. We tend to focus a lot on lambs and calves when we talk about kind of worming control and fecal egg counting, but there's a big benefit. And we had a big reduction in how many ewes are wormed. And when you talk about the ewes, it's a big dose. It's more chemical. So there's more chemical coming out in the dung from a ewe as well. Onto that ground and maybe being harmful to what's on the ground. We've got a couple of farms we work with. They hardly worm any adult because they've got that immunity. And there's a big impact of body condition score. Nutrition has a huge impact on this. If your ewes are in good nick, and they're well nourished on a good plane of nutrition, they will maintain their immunity. We won't get to the drop in immunity we see in a lot of systems. So that has a big influence on that. We only rely on fecal egg counts as well. Fecal egg counts is a tool we should use it alongside other things. So growth rates is a really good indicator as well alongside it. Growth rates alone concern me because there are other things that actually cause kind of performance loss. In West Wales, we have a huge issue with kind of mineral status and and other diseases, etc. The minerals is a big one, so selenium and cobalt especially. But we can use that alongside fecal egg count, body condition score. We still use our shepherd and Hers person skills as well. It's just not just relying. We get some fanatics that only look at data. We see this in other things like EBVs and so on, when we breeding stock as well. And for cattle, quite a bit was focused on sheep, but it's a very similar message in cattle. We did other work with Farming Connect, looking at this, improving. We could really see big improvements in the work we did on 3 cattle farms we worked with in West Wales. A lot less has been done in cattle and sheep on fecal egg counting and monitoring. Thresholds are a bit lower, it's a bit more, so we need a more sensitive test. But there's a heavy reliance on the 3 mLs here and due to injectable and poron. So we've definitely got some efficacy issues. I'm going to touch on that. The thing about if you're doing monitoring of cattle, you've got to be very careful because fecal egg count won't pick up a lungworm, okay? So we're advocating vaccinating for lungworm for cattle. It's become far less fashionable. It's not the easiest thing to do. It is expensive, but we do advocate it. But you've got to be careful about lungworm. Yeah, and another pitfall is we see a lot of folk, I think we talked about this last night over a beer, Sally Ann, actually. A lot of folk actually will do testing for a year or two, and we think we know what's happening now. We think we know the pattern. But year on year, each season's different. Year on year will change. We can see the different conditions out there this year to last year. So this is a graph showing fecal. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but this is 2 farms. So Farm E is the first block, and the second block is Farm J, 2 farms in that cattle project. You can see the different fecal egg counts there, that each dot is a fecal egg count. The difference between the farms, very similar systems. If you wrote down their pattern of management on the farms and how they managed the block of land where these calves were, it'd be very similar. They've got very different. That's over a course of 3 years. If you looked in detail, there is variability between each of the 3 years there on each of the farm. I haven't got time to go into the detail, but don't assume we've done it. Actually, this is a key thing as well, going back to the simple. This is a problem I have in the industry. We can talk about the fancy kit in the middle and doing the tech, doing the fecal egg counting correct, etc. But one of the biggest factors we've got in the industry is making sure we get a good sample. And I've got concerns, poor samples being collected. They're not representative of a group when we do pooled or mob sampling. So I wrote this for a vet kind of for the BCVA last autumn. I see a lot of vets, they'll get kind of margarine tubs kind of with kind of fecal material in it. And actually, somebody told me the other day they found there's still margarine in the tub when it arrived in the vet practice. And they were dry and they weren't representative. For me, we shouldn't accept it. We should educate, give it back. I'm not going to test this. You're going to waste your 16, 20 pound, whatever you test with us, whatever. We should put that back and educate them about getting a proper sample in, because it's a waste of time and effort on everybody's part. Yeah, unreliable results. Again, farmers not believing. And remembering we don't have to pen animals. We can collect them in the field when we're checking our sheep or livestock, etc. It's easy enough to collect in the field. You don't have to bring them in as long as you've got fresh samples, etc. I just want to finish off with a note on wormer resistance. I think it's quite important. I think quite often, if the regen farmers and the system, we're relying less on wormers. It doesn't matter to a regen farmer maybe. But my challenge there, I think it's rare to get away with no wormer use at all. There'll be some in the audience, I'm sure, that can, but it is rare. Even on clean grazing systems, we see these things. It's amazing how quick something could come in and populate your farm. We were talking about deer populations, may potentially carrying these parasites to farms last night. Wormers are still an important part of that toolbox. They are. We just have to, make sure when we reach for the wormer gun, we need to ensure that's got good control. Time and time again, we see inefficacies. If the wormer treatment's not fully effective, that means there's parasites left behind. That means the interval to the next treatment is going to be shorter, and that means more treatment and more chemical. Okay, that's why I think it's important for a regen farmer even. And we're not controlling pasture contamination. That means we're increasing the worm challenge again, potentially more. So it's actually bad news for dung beetles, because if we're not effectively controlling it when we're reaching for that bottle and the chemical approach, it means, that opportunity to have good control in it, we're losing out on, and means potentially more frequent treatments potentially, okay? Just what is the picture here? Just very quickly, this is work we did a few years ago now. We are repeating this now. Each bar there, these are the 4 wormers we use, so a white wormer, a yellow wormer, and 2 in the ML group. We use the ivermectin and the longer-acting moxidectin. That shows you the percentage of farms that had resistance to each of the ones there. So most farmers were unaware. Everybody knew that white worm was an issue probably, but I think the ivermectin, moxidectin, and levamisole was a surprise to the majority of farmers. And 43% were resistant at some level to 3 or 4 wormers. Okay, there's detail to this which we can go into, and I can talk for an hour on this subject alone. But but general picture is not good. We also did work with Sainsbury's, and we found 84% of UK farmers in the Sainsbury's supply chain weren't using a treatment fully effective. just updating that with some very recent data we did for Farming Connect in Wales. The picture's getting worse. You can see that ivermectin block and moxidectin, it's getting worse. And we look at, for cattle, 3 ml wormers are the most common failures when it comes to cattle as well. So and I just touched on this in New Zealand as well. The answer to resistance in New Zealand has been to load the shotgun with everything we have and blast it. And you can buy triple combination wormers in New Zealand. And work that we've done, we've seen an increase from 12 years ago. There was no resistance to that triple combination. Now, 12 years on, 27% of farms have got triple combination resistance. And it's increasing rapidly when it comes. So it is a big problem for us. So just to completely finish off, I think we need to evolve our mindset. Historic, we accept there was a parasite challenge there and reliance on the chemical approach to blitz them. We need to evolve that to think more about how can we manage farms to reduce the challenge in the first place. There's lots of ways to do that. The larvae do damage. I'm not going to dwell on this slide much, but there are a lot of things we can do. There's a lot of different stands talking about different approaches to this as well. Reducing, safer pastures. Sally Ann mentioned the herbal lays and all these things. Mapping where contamination is and using that in grazing plans. There's a couple of breeders here breeding resistant or resilient rams as well and resilient stocks. That's a part of this. These are all tools within our toolbox, okay? But again, monitoring is a key to that. So that's my kind of bit, just a bit over time, but it's thanks for listening. The key take-homes, regular is the key for me when we do fecal egg counting. That's a big, big key for me, and a good sample collection. But if we can do it right, collect the data, connecting the data to the right people, to the expertise who can help us, hopefully we can reduce the reliance on wormers. That's what we want to do, is not rely on wormers. We can maintain good production and do the job we need to do with the ecology. And there's also reducing further resistance development. Thank you.
Right, questions. We got someone roving with a microphone.
Hello? If I take a little pot of sheep shit into the vet, how much does it cost for them to test it for me?
Depends who your vet is and where they are. And
Tissot vet.
Sorry?
Okay,
I know. Yeah, okay. I could probably tell you. I could probably find out. It does vary, so across the country. Some do it as cheap as £5, which I think is really undervaluing it, and it's up to 40. Some do. I heard somebody yesterday tell me they pay £45 for a test as well. I think around the kind of £12 to £20 mark is quite a common kind of mark somewhere, basically. So what we try and do, encourage, so it might be £16 or £20 for a one-off, but if you're going to do regular testing, and we do a package deal for you where maybe per test it comes down, per test, but we can do a package deal. But it needs to be affordable, but don't undervalue it, because I think getting parasite control wrong can be massively expensive as well, and more expensive. Yeah. It's an investment rather than a cost. How much would I invest in it would be the question. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Really good talk. How bad are the flucicide treatments like triclobendazole and clozantol on dung beetles populations?
They're still insecticides. And that's where the problem lies. Basically, and it's not just those sort of things as well. It's porons for fly strike, so your Crovex and things as well, and things like that are everything that has an insecticide is going to have a detrimental effect. It's how long it continues in the dung beyond the usage in the animal. That's the big problem. So we had a paper that was published the other year, I peer reviewed for Bryony Sands and a couple of other colleagues, where they looked at the residue going into dung, going into a muck heap, being exposed to sunlight. Sunlight's supposed to break all this down and everything as well, heating up in a muck heap. And then it went out from the muck heap 4 months later out into the field, where it was spread in the field, and then it's rained on, and it's gone down into the land drains and into the watercourses, and it's killing Daphne water fleas. So this is a big problem. I'm trying to think which one. It was one of the ivermectins in that case. But the problem we got was also is what they've done now is they've now put a warning sign on the treatments. So when you get any of your treatments now, you pick them up and it says basically lethal to dung fauna. So now you lot know, and it's your fault. This is a big problem. Resistance is a big problem. People aren't doing weight to dose, and I've got big issues about some of our grants and how we're working our grants, because I've got farmers who are buying equipment and then they're finding out it's not quite right for that grant, or they're putting it, they're buying equipment and it's not ready in time, and things like that. And we're not getting there is a lot of work going on at the moment, and it isn't quite joined up, which is a bit of a problem, which is integrated weighers, especially this is for sheep, integrated weighers in your handling system that have a Bluetooth applicator, because that's where a lot of the breakdown is. You've got you're running your animals through, and then you've got them going onto the weigher, and you've got to keep changing that applicator by a millimetre or so, and it's not happening because you haven't got time. You've got lots to going on and everything else. So they're actually working on this Bluetooth applicator that will naturally do it as the animal goes on and correspond with the animal. That's going to make a big difference. But at the moment, that's not fully finished. It hasn't got all right back up. We've got a few companies up in Scotland working on it, and the grant system isn't in place for it. So we've got a lot of joined up thinking to do yet. But yes, going back to your thing, yeah, it's an insecticide, and it's having a residual effect, definitely. It's a very difficult scenario. This is like the worst scenario of all, actually, because if you had a moth that needs 2 years worth of growth on a hawthorn hedge, you can just do that. This is such a complex thing because we cannot compromise animal welfare either. It's how we're going to reduce that. Like Erin was saying, that you've got your fetal egg testing, you've got blood testing. You've got to think about how you buy your animals as well. If you've got a closed flock or a closed herd, they're actually on your farm with your parasites and they're able to cope with them. I've got farmers who, and I've probably been this myself in the past. I've looked out there and it's a shitty bum. I'll go and treat it with whatever I've got in the back of the Land Rover. That's not good practice. We know we've got to weigh to dose. We know that we've got to treat according to the life cycle of which parasite it is and to that parasite, because it might be something that can only be treated in the larval stage or anything like that. We've got to, ideally, if we can map our farms, find out what our parasite cycles are, where we've got things. If you've got fluke in a certain area, try not to graze that area if you can at that time of the year. I've got one area that's really bad for hornfly. So I've learned, basically I'm trying not to put my rams there for that time of the year. It's that sort of thing. Try and work your farm around. But nature has a way. Parasites are awesome. They're like viruses. They can adapt and change very quickly. And you can take your eye off the ball and they're there. It's a very complex thing really on that front. But if you're buying rams and bulls, guys, don't just buy them from the market. Buy them from somebody Try and look into resistance. It's really, really important. If that one animal comes home to your farm and sheds out, you've just bought the most expensive animal you've ever going to lay out on. You really have. We're very British. We don't like to upset people. We don't like to ask awkward questions. But you have every right to ask about resistant parasites on that property. And you can check. You have access to its medical records as well. You can speak to their vets. You will look at its feet. Can it stand up? Is it lame? You will look whether it's got a couple of testicles. They're always good if you're looking for a breeding animal. All that sort of thing, long back, everything, all these things you want, put what's going on inside that animal on that list. It's really important. Let's not keep moving this resistance around. That's causing us loads of trouble. Sorry, that was a very long answer. Sorry. I get carried away.
Hi, following on from the Dung Beetles safari earlier, is there anything that we can do to try and help counter the narrative about destocking our landscapes, about we've got lots of pressure for 24-hour housing of cows, we've all year round. We've got the NBA calling for greater intensification of the beef industry as an initiative towards climate change. We've got environmental schemes, destocking of Dartmoor and things like that, and all of this is devastating for dung beetles. Now, I fully accept what you said earlier, and you repeated again in this talk, that as producers, our primary aim is to run a profitable business. But there's got to be a more rounded discussion of all this.
Absolutely. I mean, the destocking thing's a bit of a nightmare. Basically, on Dartmoor, we're working on a whole load of papers to basically bring the hard in, the actual data forward of why we need stock out there. And what impact it's going to have, not only on these species, and we've got some really rare species on Dartmoor. That's not just dung beetles either, but also the wider biodiversity and migrating birds and things like that as well. But what we're trying to do there is we have to get that work published. It doesn't stand. It can't be hearsay that no, this is bad if you move stock. We've got to get it published, so we're fighting very hard to get it published at the moment. Lots of different things. That chart that you saw earlier was from Dartmoor Research, which showed us that sheep are supporting more species of dung beetle than any other livestock species, which is really, really important because sheep are the ones really, the woolly maggots that they want off the countryside. And actually, sheep are showing me all sorts of great things, and they're out during the winter. So, it's down to publishing things and getting that data together, and we are on the case on doing that.
I think as well, it's election time at the moment. Lots of politicians out there. Make sure our voices get heard, and the more people who tell them, we are probably going to have a new government by the looks of it, whether they'll regard food security and all these kind of things. And but it is a chance to have that. We're going to make sure that it's heard in the right places, so that policymakers, are putting the right things in place to protect the environment. Because it is, seems to be quite blinkered and taken by. Sort of quite headline things from kind of some superstars out there, sort of at the moment. But we need to make sure, it's opportunities for us all to speak and make our voice heard and stuff. To get that message across. Yeah,
dung beetles were recently discussed in Parliament with George Eustace led it. So and that was all to do with fighting the removal of stock. If they remove stock off Dartmoor, they're going to remove it off or Bodmin, Exmoor, Yorkshire moors, and so on and so forth, Cairngorms and God knows where. It's and the other thing that we're not doing very well is that we're changing. We're doing a lot with landscapes, and we're not necessarily putting really good surveys in for species before we change the landscape. That's quite important, and it's very hard. Things like insects, there are entomologists that can do several different groups, but not all of them. And so you get somebody else in, and we don't put a value on insects. You'll happily pay someone to come and do a bat survey or a bird survey. Sorry, Noah, but you won't pay someone to come and do a bug survey because they're just bugs. So it's also getting that understanding. These things dominate the food level, the trophic level above plants. Sorry. Yeah, really, really important. Hugely important.
Hi, really interesting talk. Thank you. Two things. Do either of you have any knowledge about how effective Vermex is, or other products that are using more herbal-based things for wormers? And the other thing was just a comment about, I go on a lot of farms, and it's so common to see wormers stored in cupboards that get over 25 degrees or whatever it says on the packet, and I think and it then renders it ineffective. So it was just something to think about as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of ineffective wormers being used not because of resistance. It's ineffective is because of things like storage and handling and so on. But that in itself can lead to resistance as well, because it might have a bit of an effect, but it keeps some half resistant worms surviving, which would normally get killed by a proper dose of it. We haven't done any work on any of the kind of herbal, kind of medicinal kind of things. I've seen some. I think the evidence is I'm not sure where we've been involved in stuff. What I have seen is, it's not as good as worming. It won't wipe everything out, but it might help reduce the burden. It might help kind of reduce establishment of worms rather than a complete kind of blanket treatment, because we know that some of the things like sainfoin, chicory, plantain do have tannins and so on thing there, which help decrease the establishment of the worms in the gut in the first place. So I think they're a help rather than a cure when you have a big worm burden is experience that I've had with those kind of things.
I think it comes down also to your breeding. Breed good stock from good stock, breed resilience and resistance. All that sort of thing we were talking about earlier on. Absolutely. We've been doing some trials on young lambs in Dartmoor. Again, Dartmoor. They are losing an awful lot of these lambs under 2 weeks to ticks, just being sucked dry by ticks. And so we're looking at the health of the lamb's guts up post-birth, and we're using vitamin B12 under license for some trials, and we're finding that actually, making those guts stronger and everything else, the lambs are more resilient and resistant to the parasites, or in this case to the ticks. I mean, personally, I think we just want to make the from the tourist car parks, make the little walkways a bit thinner, let the bracken really go over, and then just let the tourists mop up the ticks. I mean, that's just, I was being recorded as well. But my alternative parasite management plan here. But basically, you know, it's that sort of thing. We are very prone to breeding bad stock in a way. And we've our national herd and our national flock have got some really dodgy members to it. And that's because we've been able to dose and hide and treat and carry on. And we've created a little bit of a problem. And no one wants to go out there and say, right, I've got a cattle. Well, it's more sheep, to be honest, a lot of the time. You know, I don't want to go out there and, let's be honest, I might have to remove 50% of my flock. You know, people just don't want to do that. But we've got to seriously think about what we're breeding from. Absolutely. Don't be tempted to play the numbers game. We all think about it, but actually you're better off with one ewe that can produce 2 lambs with least problems and healthy lambs with as least problems than you are spending half your life getting really cross with it because it's rejecting and it's doing this and you got one udder and a million other things going on. Sheep. I've done a lot of work with sheep.
I think that's time, Sally. Sort of, I know we'll probably carry on talking here for a while, but you're welcome. But it's, yeah, thank you very much, everybody.